Hey guys, it's Cam from Craft & Tailored, and in this episode of What Is On My Wrist, we're talking about a Tudor Big Block reference 94210 that possesses an exotic dial. It's awesome. Let's get into the details. Tudor Big Blocks have seen a rise in popularity, I think, over the past 3 to 5 years, and I think there's that saying that a rising tide lifts all ships, right? And we've seen tremendous growth within the 4-digit Daytona range, for example, like the 6239s or 6263s. The vintage Daytona market has definitely increased in terms of visibility and popularity over the past 3 to 5 years. And I think as a result of that, the Tudor or the vintage Tudor range, especially the Tudor Big Blocks, have seen an increase in popularity as well. We just wrote an article about the Tudor Big Block range of watches, and I'll provide a link in the description below, but we kind of take you through the ins and outs of the Tudor Big Block range and talk about why in many ways the Tudor version of the chronograph is in many ways superior to the Daytona from kind of a technical perspective. So what's interesting is the Daytona is often referred to as the bigger brother to the Tudor Big Block range of chronographs, but in actuality, the Tudor Big Blocks and the Tudor chronograph range possessed features and I would say a complication set that in many ways was kind of more technically advanced and in many ways superior to the 6263 or the 6265 or the all-encompassing 4-digit Daytona range. So let's talk a little bit about big blocks. I want to talk about this 94210. This is a really incredible example that possesses an exotic dial, and there's a lot of kind of crossover between the 4-digit Daytona range and the Tudor Big Blocks, and I think it would make an interesting discussion, so that's why we're obviously talking about it. And this is a superb example, so definitely wanted to feature this and highlight it on What Is On My Wrist. So the Big Block name basically comes from the fact that the thickness of the Big Block range of chronographs it's pretty chunky and pretty beefy. And the Big Block reference range basically encompasses the 9400 series and the 79100 series of Tudor chronographs. The Big Block actually came into production in 1978 and was in production to around 95, 96. There's some kind of stragglers at the end of the 1996 production range for Tudor, but pretty big span of production period for the Big Block. So the Tudor Big Block was in many ways superior to its big brother, the Rolex Daytona, in the 4-digit range, being the 6263 and the 6265, because it offered an automatic self-winding movement, whereas Rolex really didn't implement that into the Daytona, meaning that they didn't offer a self-winding or an automatic Daytona until 1988 with the introduction of the Zenith Daytona. The Big Block in 1978 leveraged a Valjoux 7750, which basically makes it the first automatic or self-winding chronograph under the Hans Waldorf brand. So that's kind of special. The 7750 possesses a date complication at the 3 o'clock, along with 3 subdials for measuring hours, minutes, and of course running sweep seconds. So very, very interesting. The other thing that's interesting about the Big Block range of chronographs is that you see kind of a different feature set while still retaining some of the things from, let's say, like a Rolex Daytona. So for example, you have these screw down pushers, which are very much similar to like the 6263 or the Oyster type of 4-digit Daytonas, Rolex sign crown, Rolex case back, Rolex bracelet. So it's a Daytona-ish watch, but it's ultimately kind of its own thing. For example, the Big Block references in many cases leveraged a Rolex 78-360 Oyster bracelet with 589 end pieces, which are kind of unique to the Big Block due to the thickness of the case. And the reason why, talking about the Big Block nickname, is that the case, or the mid case, was a lot thicker and wider to accommodate the 7750 value based movement that ultimately Tudor modified, which is a thick as movement that obviously has an oscillating weight. So the Big Block nickname comes from the fact that the mid case of the watch is thick. Another interesting thing about the Big Blocks too is we do see an exotic dial variant, which this example from 1981 does possess. So this is kind of like Monte Carlo-esque. So if you look at the manually wound Tudor chronographs from the earlier part of the 1970s, they had a black dial as well as a blue dial Monte Carlo variant, and there's also a blue dial variant in the 94210 as well. This just happens to be a black dial variant. So the Tudor Big Block reference 94300 basically looks like a 6265 in that it has an outer bezel that is steel. So the tachymeter scale is on the outside of the dial, on the outside of the crystal. And then the 79160 is similar to Rolex Daytona 6263 in that it has an outer acrylic or a bakelite type of bezel that includes the tachymeter scale. The thing that makes the 94210 unique onto itself is that you have this, again, outer rotating bezel, which is only within the Tudor range. So Rolex never produced a Daytona or a Cosmograph or a chronograph rather that had this type of, in the 4-digit range under Daytona specifically, that had this outer rotating bezel. So really, really interesting watch, very, very cool. And like I said, we did write an article that'll provide a link in the description below so that you can kind of learn about the Big Block range of watches and kind of go through the ins and outs of that. The other thing too, again, we were kind of talking about this, is this does possess an exotic dial. There are more contemporary dial variants in either silver or in black. So let's talk about some technical aspects of the 94210 as well as just the entire Big Block range in itself. So the Big Block case diameter is 40 millimeters wide and 14.5 millimeters thick. So again, very thick case. I wouldn't say that it wears obscenely oversized. It feels nice when it's on the wrist, but it's definitely a little bit more on the chunky side, especially if you're used to like a 6263 or even maybe, let's say, like a Zenith Daytona, which are quite a bit thinner. Again, Rolex was providing a lot of the case parts for Tudor all the way up until really the later part of the 1990s. So the Oyster bracelet includes a non-flip lock clasp that you can see in both the 9400 and 79100 series of watches. 7 millimeter trip lock Rolex crown, as well as the Daytona style 6263, 6265 style pushers. So again, there's that. Again, from a technical perspective, it doesn't wear obscenely oversized. It's actually quite nice when on the wrist, especially when the bracelet is sized properly. And I wouldn't say that the bracelet feels, loose or anything like that. It's a solid Oyster, bracelet, which accents the case quite nicely. So it's balanced and, proportional. So this specific 1981 94210 is in really, really nice condition. The case is definitely unpolished. So we've got, the factory brush finishing on the top sides of the lugs, as well as nice symmetry. The sides of the Big Block case are very blunt. So if you look at the later Tudor chronograph series, as well as, let's say, like the Daytona 6263, 6265, and then into the Zenith, you're gonna have kind of a rounding to the side of the case. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know, Dave, if you want to add some infographics or some kind of stuff. But essentially, the Big Block case is very broad and kind of flat, whereas if you move into like the 6265, 6263, and into the Zenith range, the side of the case actually does, kind of have like a curvature to the outside of the case. The dial is free from any kind of degradation or any kind of marking, and the lume on the dial is fully intact in the hands and on the the plots themselves on the actual dial. So really, really nice overall example. This one actually sold fairly quickly. What's interesting about Big Blocks and about our watches and our customer bases, we actually have a pretty deep and long waiting list for some of these watches. So if you're looking for something, what I would encourage you to do is go to craftandtailor.com and you can actually sign up. And that way, when we get stuff like this, or when we're kind of chasing this stuff down, we can notify you ahead of time that, hey, we've got a big block or whatever watch it is that you might be looking for incoming, this is it, so that you can, kind of have first dibs. A lot of watches actually don't even make it to our website, and I've been trying to feature some of that stuff in the series so that you guys can see it. But for example, exotic dial Tudor big blocks like this, we've got a good number of customers that are looking for this stuff, so sometimes this stuff sells before we even can get it onto the website. So in any case, do yourself a favor, sign up for our mailing list, as well as go online, and if you see something, sign up for the wait list so that we can notify you as this stuff comes available. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll provide a link in the description below so you can check this out. Also, be sure to check out the Tudor Big Block article, because it gives you a good primer on the big block range of watches and a historical overview of the reference range. I'll provide a link in the description below for that, or up here or somewhere. And as always, guys, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well for the latest update and contents from us here at Craft and Tailored. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one.